I'm Ella Richardson, 27, and I've always lived in my younger sister Lyra's shadow. Growing up in a military family, I chose a different path, one that led to a career I could never talk about. At my cousin's wedding last spring, Lyra continued her lifelong habit of belittling me in front of everyone. "She's just my sister," she laughed to her Air Force colleagues. Then something extraordinary happened. Her commander froze, turned pale, and saluted me. Everything changed in that moment. Before I tell you how I went from being the family disappointment to watching my sister's commander snap to attention, make sure to like and subscribe if you've ever had a moment where someone finally saw your true worth. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, in a household where military precision was not just expected, but demanded. Our modest colonial home might have looked like any other on the street, but inside, it operated with the discipline of a small barracks. My father, James Richardson, retired as an Army colonel after 30 years of service. He brought the military home with him in every sense, from morning inspections of our bedrooms to the precise scheduling of family activities. Dad stood tall, shoulders always square, with salt and pepper hair kept in the same precise crew cut he'd worn since West Point. His voice carried the authority of someone used to commanding troops, and his rare smiles were rewards we competed for like medals. The Richardson legacy is service, he would remind us at dinner. Honor, duty, country, those aren't just words, they're our family values. My mother, Catherine, had been a military nurse when she met my father. Though she'd hung up her uniform to raise us, she maintained the efficiency and composure of her nursing days. She was gentler than Dad, but deferred to his authority in most family matters. Mom's quiet support was consistent, though I often wished she'd advocate more strongly when Dad's expectations became overwhelming. And then there was Lyra, my younger sister by 2 years. From the moment she could walk, she seemed designed to fulfill our father's military dreams. While I buried myself in books, Lyra was scaling trees and organizing neighborhood kids into mock battalions. By age 6, she could recite military ranks in order. By 10, she was winning youth physical fitness competitions. Dad's eyes would light up watching her, a look I rarely saw directed my way. Lyra's a natural leader, he'd beam to his military buddies who visited. Richardson blood through and through. I was different. Where Lyra was athletic and commanding, I was thoughtful and analytical. My battlefield was the classroom, and my weapons were words and ideas. I excelled academically, learning to find validation in perfect test scores and teacher commendations, since they rarely came from home. The pattern was established early. When I won the regional spelling bee in 7th grade, the family celebration was brief before conversation turned to Lyra's upcoming JROTC drill competition. When I was selected for the National Honor Society, Dad nodded approvingly before asking Lyra about her physical training progress. One memory stands out with particular clarity. I was 16, studying at the kitchen table for AP exams while Lyra practiced field stripping and reassembling a training rifle in the living room. Dad sat beside her with a stopwatch, calling out times and suggestions. "Ella," he called over his shoulder, "come watch your sister." Now that's a skill that builds character. I joined them reluctantly, watching Lyra's confident hands navigate the metal components. "Try that with your textbooks," Lyra teased, finishing with an impressive time. Dad laughed. "Different strengths, I suppose." The words seemed conciliatory, but his tone made clear which strengths he valued more. The only person who seemed to truly see me was my grandfather Arthur, Dad's father. A World War II veteran with a quiet dignity, Grandpa Arthur visited monthly, bringing books that fed my curiosity about the world. Unlike my father, he asked questions about what I was learning and thinking. "The military needs all kinds of minds," he told me once when I confided my feelings of inadequacy. The soldiers on the ground, yes, but also the thinkers, the analyzers, the ones who see patterns others miss. Something in his eyes suggested he knew this from experience, though he rarely spoke about his war years beyond basic facts. Your grandfather had a different kind of service, Mom mentioned once while folding laundry. Not all of it in uniform. When I pressed for details, she simply smiled. Some stories aren't mine to tell. My high school graduation should have been my moment. As valedictorian, I delivered a speech on the importance of finding one's own path to service, words aimed directly at my father, though I doubted he understood the message. The polite applause felt hollow compared to the family celebration that erupted days later when Lyra's acceptance to the Air Force Academy arrived. Richardson back at the academy, Dad announced at an impromptu party, inviting neighbors and military friends. Carrying on the tradition. I stood in the corner, my college acceptance letters to Georgetown, Harvard, and Yale sitting unopened on my desk upstairs. I'd already decided on Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, but in that moment, watching my father's genuine pride in Lyra, I wondered if any academic achievement would ever measure up in his eyes. "They'll see your worth one day," Grandpa Arthur whispered, appearing beside me with a glass of lemonade. Some contributions can't be measured in medals and ribbons. I couldn't know then how prophetic his words would become, or how many years I would wait for them to come true. Georgetown University opened a world of possibilities I hadn't dared imagine in the shadow of my family's military expectations. The School of Foreign Service challenged me intellectually, while Washington, D.C. exposed me to the complex reality of global politics beyond textbooks and theory. I threw myself into my studies with the same discipline I'd learned at home, but redirected toward international relations, political theory, and languages. Russian came naturally to me, followed by Mandarin and Arabic. While other students complained about the rigorous language requirements, I found comfort in the structured patterns of new communication systems. "You have an ear for nuance," my Russian professor noted after class one day, "and a memory for details most students miss." My letters home described classes and DC landmarks, but couldn't capture my growing sense of purpose. During family phone calls, I'd barely finished describing a challenging diplomatic simulation before Dad would interrupt. "That's nice, Ella. Did you hear Lyra completed wilderness survival training? Top of her class." Meanwhile, Lyra's academy experience dominated family conversations. Each accomplishment was celebrated, each challenge analyzed in detail. While I struggled privately with the intensity of my program, Lyra's struggles were family affairs, with Dad offering strategic advice from his own military days. During my junior year, I was selected for an intensive summer language immersion program. What my family didn't know was that the program was partially sponsored by government agencies scouting talent. My analytical abilities and language skills had caught attention beyond academia. The recruitment was subtle at first. A professor suggesting special research projects, guest lectures by consultants who took particular interest in my questions, casual conversations about career goals with visiting alumni whose business cards bore vague government affiliations. By senior year, the conversations became more direct. A woman named Diana Baker with a nondescript pantsuit and perfect posture approached me after an international security seminar. "Your analysis of information flow patterns in crisis situations was impressive," she said, handing me a business card with only a name and number. "We should discuss your career plans." 2 weeks later, I sat in a nondescript government building, signing the first of many non-disclosure agreements. The recruitment process was both more rigorous and more fascinating than I had imagined. The testing went far beyond languages and knowledge, probing my ethical frameworks, decision-making under pressure, and psychological resilience. When the official offer came, I accepted immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was entering government service after all, just not in the uniform my father revered. Explaining my job to family proved challenging. "I'll be working as an analyst with a government agency," I said vaguely during Thanksgiving my senior year. "Which department?" Dad asked, carving the turkey with military precision. It's interdepartmental, actually. International relations focus. The deliberate vagueness was already becoming habitual. So pushing papers for the State Department? Lyra concluded, reaching for the mashed potatoes. She was home on break, her academy uniform replaced with civilian clothes that still somehow looked crisp and official. Something like that, I replied, catching the familiar disappointment in Dad's eyes. Well, not everyone's cut out for real service, he said, his tone softening the harsh words only slightly. Supporting roles are necessary too. I bit my tongue as Lyra launched into a story about tactical training exercises, complete with technical jargon that Dad eagerly dissected. Mom squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. The distance between my actual work and what I could share grew rapidly after graduation. While Lyra posted photos in uniform on social media and called home with sanitized mission stories, I disappeared into training that I couldn't discuss. Physical conditioning that left me exhausted. Language immersion that went far beyond academic fluency. Psychological preparation for scenarios I once thought existed only in films. My cover story, a mid-level analyst position reviewing cultural and economic reports, was deliberately forgettable. I learned to answer questions about my work with accurate but mind-numbingly boring procedural details that discouraged further inquiry. Grandpa Arthur's health began declining during my second year of service. During my last visit to his assisted living facility, he seemed more lucid than he had in months, his eyes sharp as they fixed on me. "You found your way to serve," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Just an office job, Grandpa," I replied automatically. He smiled, a knowing look that made me wonder. "I recognize the signs, Ella. The careful answers. The physical changes." He gestured to my posture, the unconscious situational awareness I'd developed. "Your grandmother saw the same in me, years ago." I started to deflect, but he raised a hand. "No details needed. But know that I understand." He reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Different battlefields, same commitment. I'm proud of you." He died 3 weeks later. At the funeral, I stood beside Lyra, now a commissioned officer in full dress uniform. Dad stood stiffly in his old service uniform, accepting condolences from military friends. I wore a simple black dress, feeling both invisible and exposed. The pastor spoke of Grandpa's military service, his community contributions, his family devotion. What went unmentioned were the gaps in his service record, the years minimally documented that I now recognized as significant in ways I couldn't discuss. As we left the cemetery, an elderly man I didn't recognize shook my hand firmly. "Arthur always said you were the one who'd understand," he said cryptically, before disappearing into the crowd of mourners. That evening, Lyra found me on the porch of our childhood home. "You okay? You've been quiet." Her concern seemed genuine. "Just thinking about Grandpa. He was proud of you, you know," she said, surprising me. "He told me once that you were carrying on a family tradition I didn't know about." I looked at her sharply, but her expression showed only confusion at the memory. "Probably meant your academic achievements," she added after a moment. "Since you didn't follow the military tradition." I nodded, letting her believe that interpretation, wondering what Grandpa Arthur had really meant and how much he had actually known about my new life. The training facility looked nothing like I had imagined. Located on a sprawling, wooded campus that could have been mistaken for a corporate retreat center, it was where my real education began. The physical training was grueling, more demanding than anything Lyra had boasted about from her military preparation. Beyond fitness were the specialized skills, surveillance detection, secure communication protocols, behavioral analysis, and tradecraft basics that would keep me alive in the field. Language training went far beyond academic proficiency. I was drilled in regional dialects, slang, and cultural nuances that no university course had covered. My Russian transformed from textbook perfect to conversationally authentic, complete with regional markers that could place me from Moscow to Vladivostok depending on the need. Similar depth followed with my Mandarin and Arabic. Language isn't just about words, my instructor Natalie explained. It's about becoming someone else entirely, someone who thinks in that language, who has memories and habits that align with the cover. The psychological preparation was perhaps the most challenging aspect. Learning to compartmentalize, to maintain cover under stress, to read people and situations with clinical detachment while appearing fully engaged. Your family background actually helps you here, my training supervisor remarked during an evaluation. You've been living a kind of dual existence already, meeting expectations while protecting your true thoughts. We're just refining that skill. I wasn't sure if I should feel insulted or validated by the observation. My first field assignment came after 18 months of preparation. The details remain classified, but I remember the adrenaline surge when the operation plan was approved, the meticulous preparation of my cover identity, and the strange calm that settled over me once I was in position. "You're a natural," Jessica Hayes, my colleague and eventual friend, told me after we returned. Jessica became one of the few people with whom I could be relatively honest. 5 years my senior in the agency, she became both mentor and confidant. "How do you handle it with your family?" I asked her one night over secure comms during a long surveillance shift. "Badly," she laughed softly. "My mother thinks I'm an unhappy accountant with irritable bowel syndrome to explain my travel schedule and stress patterns. Mine think I'm a glorified secretary," I admitted. "My sister's in the Air Force. In their eyes, she's the one really serving. The invisible service," Jessica mused. "That's us. Essential, but unseen. It takes a particular kind of person to be okay with that." Over the next 5 years, I built a reputation within the agency. My analytical abilities combined with field adaptability made me valuable for certain types of operations. I advanced faster than most of my training cohort, taking on increasingly complex assignments that required both mental acuity and physical courage. There were close calls, of course. An extraction in Eastern Europe that nearly went sideways when a contact showed up with unexpected company. A data collection operation in Asia where I maintained cover through 3 days of intensive questioning after a security breach in the facility where I was placed. The hardest mission came in my 4th year of service. The operational details remain classified, but what matters is that things went catastrophically wrong due to intelligence failures outside our control. Jessica and I found ourselves improvising an extraction for 3 local assets whose covers had been compromised. For 72 hours, we navigated a hostile urban environment with minimal support, staying ahead of local security forces while protecting civilians who had risked everything to provide information. When we finally reached the extraction point, I had been awake for nearly 3 days, had a bullet graze on my left shoulder, and had made decisions I still revisit in quiet moments of doubt. The after-action evaluation called our improvised operation exceptional and credited our actions with saving numerous lives. There was a private commendation ceremony, medals that went into secure storage rather than on display, and a promotion that came with greater operational authority. And then I went home to my sparse apartment, applied cover makeup to the healing wound on my shoulder, and called my parents for our monthly check-in. "Sorry I missed your call last week," I explained. "Had a work conference in Chicago." "One of these days you should find a job that actually values you," Dad replied. "Lyra's squadron is being deployed next month. Special recognition from command for their readiness scores." The disconnect between my 2 lives grew increasingly surreal. In one world, I was trusted with operations that had direct national security implications. In the other, I was the disappointing daughter who couldn't find a real career or understand the value of visible service. The deception took its toll. I developed the habit of thoroughly sweeping my apartment for surveillance before allowing myself brief moments of genuine emotion, usually alternating between frustrated tears and borderline hysterical laughter at the absurdity of my situation. You need connections outside the job, Jessica advised during a rare social dinner between assignments. Even if they can't know the truth, you need people who know the real you, or at least more of you than your family does. That seems unfair to them, I argued. Building relationships on necessary lies. The alternative is worse, she said with the wisdom of experience. This job devours people who try to go it completely alone. Trust me on this. I tried taking her advice, cultivating a few civilian friendships with people who accepted my vague job description and unpredictable availability. It helped, but the compartmentalization remained exhausting. Then came the invitation that would change everything, my cousin Ethan's wedding. The formal card arrived between deployments, requesting my presence at a ceremony to be held at the Officers Club on a Virginia military base, courtesy of his fiancé's family connections. Lyra will be there, Mom mentioned during our next call. With her commanding officer and some colleagues. It would mean a lot if you could come too. I nearly declined. The thought of spending a weekend being reminded of my inadequate service in comparison to Lyra's visible accomplishments held little appeal. But something in my mother's voice, a gentle plea, made me reconsider. I'll be there, I promised, already dreading the performance ahead. What I couldn't know was that this family obligation would finally bridge my divided worlds in ways I couldn't have imagined. The wedding invitation sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, a cream-colored rectangle that filled me with disproportionate anxiety. Cousin Ethan and I had been close as children before drifting apart in adulthood, him toward a corporate career, me toward my classified path. His decision to marry Emily, a military brat herself, seemed to underscore the family's values. The ceremony location at Fort Belvoir's Officers Club was just another reminder of the world where I was perpetually an outsider. You could always claim a work emergency, Jessica suggested during our weekly secure check-in. We both know they happen enough in this line of work. And reinforce that I prioritize my boring desk job over family? I sighed. That would just give Lyra more ammunition. Then go and own it, Jessica replied, her voice shifting to the tone she used when planning operations. Treat it like field work. Prepare your cover story, anticipate likely questions, control the narrative. It's my family, not a hostile intelligence service, I protested weakly. Debatable, from what you've told me, Jessica laughed. Look, just prepare specific anecdotes about your analyst job that sound plausible but forgettable. Redirect conversations to the bride and groom. And have an exit strategy for when family dynamics get overwhelming. Her practical approach helped calm my anxiety. I approached the wedding weekend with the same methodical planning I would apply to an operation, arranging a rental car for independent mobility, booking a hotel room separate from the family block for privacy, and preparing an array of work stories that were technically true but strategically incomplete. The wardrobe decision proved unexpectedly challenging. My field readiness meant I was more physically fit than most office workers, a fact I usually disguised under loose-fitting professional attire. For the wedding, I selected a navy blue dress with a modest neckline and strategic draping that downplayed my muscle tone, pairing it with low heels that wouldn't hinder movement, if necessary, a habit I couldn't break even for a family function. I arrived in Virginia on Friday afternoon, checking into my hotel with the automatic situational awareness that had become second nature. The room inspection was subtle but thorough, another ingrained habit that I performed while appearing to unpack. The rehearsal dinner that evening would be my first family encounter in over a year. I arrived deliberately 7 minutes late, allowing me to observe the dynamics before engaging. The restaurant's private room buzzed with conversation, family members clustered in familiar patterns. My parents stood near the center, Dad looking distinguished in a blazer that emphasized his military bearing, Mom elegant and watchful beside him. I spotted Ethan with his fiancée Emily, both glowing with pre-wedding excitement. Various aunts, Uncles and cousins filled the space, some familiar, others grown or changed since I'd seen them last. No sign of Lyra yet, a small mercy that allowed me to establish my presence on my own terms. Ella, Mom spotted me first, crossing the room with genuine delight. Her hug felt like coming home, despite everything. You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful, James? Dad offered a stiff but not unfriendly embrace. Good to see you made it. Thought your work might keep you away. I requested the time off well in advance, I replied evenly. Cousin Ethan only gets married once, hopefully. This earned a small chuckle, progress in our often strained relationship. I made my rounds, exchanging pleasantries with relatives, answering the inevitable questions about my job with practiced vagueness. Government analysis isn't as exciting as it sounds, became my mantra of the evening. But tell me about your work. The strategy succeeded in deflecting attention until the restaurant door opened with military precision and Lyra made her entrance. She wasn't in uniform. The rehearsal dinner was technically casual, but everything about her screamed Air Force officer, from her perfect posture to her confident stride. Behind her came 3 people in civilian attire who nevertheless moved with unmistakable military bearing. The oldest, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and calculating eyes, could only be Colonel Marcus Reed, Lyra's commanding officer. The others, a man and woman approximately Lyra's age, were likely fellow officers. Sorry we're late, Lyra announced to the room at large. Base security took longer than expected. Dad immediately gravitated toward the new arrivals, his entire demeanor shifting to something more animated than he'd shown all evening. Colonel Reed, welcome. Thank you for coming. Introductions circled the room, with particular attention paid to the military guests. I hung back, observing the subtle hierarchies at play, until Lyra inevitably turned in my direction. And this is my sister, Ella, she said, her tone carrying the faintest edge of dismissal. She works in Washington too, but for a civilian agency. Colonel Reed extended his hand with professional courtesy. Ms. Richardson, a pleasure. Our handshake was brief, his grip firm and assessing. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, but he moved on quickly as social convention dictated. Dinner proceeded with the expected dynamics. Dad and the military contingent dominated one end of the table, trading stories and perspectives that frequently referenced protocols and operations in terms civilian guests could only partially follow. Lyra positioned herself centrally in these discussions, occasionally translating military jargon for civilians with a hint of condescension. I focused on engaging with Emily's family, asking thoughtful questions about wedding preparations and family traditions. This strategy kept me engaged, but peripheral to the military discussions, exactly as I preferred. The relative peace lasted until dessert, when Lyra approached my end of the table, wine glass in hand and color high in her cheeks from several earlier refills. So, sis, she said, loud enough to draw attention, still pushing papers at your mysterious government desk? Still analyzing international economic trends, I confirmed with a practiced smile. Not mysterious, just detailed. Must be nice having regular hours and weekends off, she continued. Some of us are on call for the country 24/7. I noticed Colonel Reed watching our interaction with unexpected intensity. His expression remained neutral, but his attention seemed unusually focused for casual family banter. Different forms of service, I offered diplomatically. Lyra laughed. Is that what we're calling it now? Service? Dad joined us, placing a proud hand on Lyra's shoulder. Your sister's squadron is being deployed next month. Classified location, of course. Of course, I nodded, recognizing the familiar family pattern reasserting itself. Congratulations on the deployment, Lyra. The conversation mercifully shifted to wedding logistics, but the tone had been set for the weekend. I excused myself shortly after, citing jet lag, and retreated to my hotel room to decompress and prepare for the main event tomorrow. As I performed my evening security routine, I reflected on the curious attention from Colonel Reed. His name was vaguely familiar beyond Lyra's mentions, but I couldn't immediately place why. I made a mental note to remain observant around him, then forced myself to focus on the wedding ahead and the inevitable family dynamics I would need to navigate. Little did I know that Colonel Reed would soon connect dots that would fundamentally alter those dynamics forever. The wedding venue gleamed under the Virginia spring sunshine. The officers' club transformed with white roses, silver ribbons, and military precision. Dress uniforms mingled with formal civilian attire as guests arrived for the 3 o'clock ceremony. I chose a seat toward the middle on the bride's side, close enough to appear properly engaged, but not so close as to be featured in primary photographs. The ceremony itself was lovely in its traditional simplicity. Ethan beamed with genuine joy, and Emily made a radiant bride. Their vows included subtle nods to both military values and civilian partnership, a thoughtful acknowledgement of their different backgrounds uniting. For a moment, watching them, I felt a pang of longing for a life less compartmentalized than my own. The reception began at 5, cocktail hour flowing seamlessly into dinner in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in white linen, each centered with arrangements of blue and silver flowers. Military formality infused the event, from the saber arch that welcomed the newlyweds to the precisely timed service of each course. I navigated the early reception carefully, making appropriate small talk with relatives, complimenting Emily's family on the beautiful arrangements, and dutifully admiring Ethan's college roommate's new baby photos. My strategy of blending in while avoiding prolonged conversation about my work seemed effective until Lyra's increasing volume began drawing attention from across the room. She looked striking in her formal Air Force blues, the uniform highlighting her athletic frame and confident posture. A small crowd of military guests and admiring family members surrounded her as she recounted what appeared to be an amusing training anecdote, her gestures becoming more animated with each glass of champagne. I maintained my distance until Mom appeared at my elbow, her expression apologetic. "Could you join your father and me at the table? Colonel Reed asked specifically if you would be joining us for dinner." This unexpected detail raised my internal alert level. Did he say why? No, just that he had heard so much about both Richardson daughters. Mom's smile turned wistful. "It would mean a lot to your father." Duty, in this case familial rather than professional, compelled me to agree. Our table near the front included my parents, Lyra and her 3 military colleagues, plus an aunt and uncle with military connections. I found myself seated directly across from Colonel Reed, with Lyra to his right. "Ms. Richardson," Reed acknowledged as I took my seat. "Your father tells me you work in government analysis." "Yes, economic trend assessment for international development programs," I replied with my standard cover. "Not nearly as interesting as what you all do." "Don't sell yourself short," he responded, his gaze more evaluating than the casual comment warranted. "Analysis is the foundation of good decision-making." Lyra snorted softly. "Trust me, Colonel, my sister's reports aren't informing any major national security decisions." "Intelligence comes in many forms, Lieutenant Richardson," Reed replied mildly, but with a subtle emphasis that made me look at him more carefully. Dinner conversation proceeded with predictable focus on military matters, interspersed with wedding commentary and family updates. I contributed appropriately while observing the interactions, particularly noting how Colonel Reed occasionally steered questions in my direction despite Lyra's attempts to showcase her military knowledge. The shift in dynamics became apparent after the main course, when Lyra's consumption of wine passed from celebratory to excessive. Her volume increased, her filter decreased, and her focus on highlighting the contrast between our career choices intensified. "You should see Ella's apartment in D.C., she announced to the table at large. "All those fancy language books gathering dust while she types reports nobody reads." I wouldn't say nobody reads them, I countered evenly. Right, sorry, Lyra laughed. I'm sure someone files them somewhere important. Dad frowned slightly at her tone but didn't intervene. Mom looked increasingly uncomfortable while Colonel Reed maintained an expression of polite interest that didn't quite match his attentive posture. As dinner gave way to dancing and mingling, Lyra's behavior progressed from mildly dismissive to actively undermining. She interrupted a conversation I was having with Emily's young cousin about college programs in international studies. Don't ask my sister for career advice unless you want to file papers all day, she announced, slinging an arm around my shoulders. Ella's the family genius who decided all those languages would be best used making spreadsheets. I analyze economic data across cultural contexts, I corrected, keeping my tone light despite the simmering frustration. It's actually quite engaging work. So engaging you can't even explain what you actually do, Lyra countered, her words slightly slurred. At least when I say that's classified, people know it's something important. Colonel Reed, who had been conversing nearby, turned subtly toward our conversation, his expression unreadable. Lyra continued her campaign throughout the evening, each interaction more pointed than the last. When an uncle asked about my recent work travels, "Oh, Ella doesn't get to go anywhere interesting. Just conference rooms with better water coolers." When a cousin commented on my fitness, "Office gyms must be getting better. Not quite military training, but I guess they have to give government workers some perks." When I mentioned having to miss a previous family gathering due to work, because analyzing trade statistics is such a national emergency, I maintained my composure through years of practiced control, but I could see Colonel Reed watching these interactions with increasing intensity. Several times he seemed on the verge of commenting, only to reconsider and observe further. The breaking point came during the traditional toasts. After the maid of honor and best man had spoken, Lyra clinked her glass and stood, swaying slightly. "I'd like to say something about family," she announced. "Ethan and Emily, you're starting an amazing journey together, bringing together different worlds like the military discipline we Richardson kids grew up with and the, well, whatever normal families do." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. "My sister and I represent different paths too," she continued, gesturing toward me with her glass, sloshing champagne dangerously close to the rim. "I followed the family tradition of actual service, while Ella here chose." She paused dramatically. "Alternative government employment." The emphasis made several guests shift uncomfortably. Colonel Reed's posture straightened perceptibly. "She's just my sister who thinks typing reports is serving her country," Lyra concluded with a laugh that didn't quite mask the mockery. "But hey, we can't all be on the front lines, right? Someone has to do the paperwork." The room fell awkwardly silent. I maintained a neutral expression through sheer professional training, but internally I was calculating the fastest exit strategy that wouldn't create a scene. To the happy couple, Lyra finished belatedly, seemingly oblivious to the tension she'd created. As conversation haltingly resumed, I excused myself and headed for the terrace, needing air and space to regain my professional equilibrium. The cool evening breeze helped clear my head as I leaned against the stone balustrade, focusing on controlled breathing techniques from training. I sensed rather than heard someone join me on the terrace. Years of field awareness had me turning smoothly before they spoke. "Miss Richardson," Colonel Reed said quietly, standing at a respectful distance. "I wanted to apologize for Lieutenant Richardson's behavior. The champagne is no excuse for unprofessional conduct." "Family dynamics are complicated," I replied neutrally. "No apology necessary from you, Colonel." He moved closer, his posture deliberately casual, yet I could read the careful assessment in his gaze. "Your sister speaks very highly of your intelligence and language abilities," he said, which we both knew was untrue. "Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic, correct?" My internal alarms intensified. This was not casual conversation. "College majors," I confirmed vaguely. Not much practical application in economic analysis, unfortunately. Reed nodded slowly, his expression changing subtly as he appeared to come to some internal decision. Ms. Richardson, would you mind if I asked where you were last October? The seemingly random question confirmed my suspicions. I maintained my cover seamlessly. Here in Virginia visiting family, then back to DC. Why do you ask? Interesting, he murmured. And does the name Operation Starlight Echo mean anything to you? The classified operation designation sent ice through my veins, though my expression remained pleasantly confused. Should it? Sounds like something from one of my sister's military exercises. Reed's eyes narrowed slightly, then his posture shifted to military attention, so subtly that most civilians wouldn't notice. My apologies for the strange questions. Something about you seemed familiar, but I must be mistaken. He was giving me an out, I realized. A chance to maintain my cover. Protocol dictated I should take it without hesitation. Instead, I made a split-second decision. Colonel, where were you stationed before your current position? Joint Special Operations Command, attached to Intelligence Integration, he replied, watching me carefully. Were you at the Darmstadt briefing last year? I asked quietly. Recognition flashed in his eyes, quickly controlled but unmistakable. I was indeed Ms. Richardson. Or should I say? I cut him off with a slight head shake. We should rejoin the reception. People will wonder where we've gone. Reed nodded, understanding the boundaries. Of course. After you. As we walked back toward the ballroom, he spoke quietly. Your sister doesn't know, does she? No one in my family does, I confirmed. And I'd prefer to keep it that way. Understood. Reed paused at the door. For what it's worth, I was at the after-action review for Starlight Echo. Exceptional work. Before I could respond, we were back in the reception, where Lyra was still holding court with increasingly slurred anecdotes about military superiority. She spotted us returning together and raised an eyebrow. Making friends with my commanding officer, Ella? Trying to get the inside scoop on what real service looks like. Colonel Reed's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I recognized the look of a decision being made, of operational parameters shifting in real time. Lieutenant Richardson, he said with formal precision. A word, please. The reception room fell into an awkward lull after Lyra's toast. Conversations resumed in uncomfortable clusters, with several guests casting sympathetic glances my way. I maintained my composed facade through years of practiced field discipline, but inside I was calculating the least conspicuous time to make my exit. Colonel Reed guided Lyra to a relatively quiet corner, their conversation too distant to overhear but clearly serious from their body language. Lyra's expression shifted from confusion to something resembling chastened sobriety as Reed spoke with quiet intensity. I strategically positioned myself near a group of distant cousins discussing wedding logistics, contributing just enough to appear engaged while monitoring the room's dynamics. Dad watched Lyra's conversation with Reed, his posture betraying concern about whatever correction his golden child might be receiving. When Reed and Lyra concluded their conversation, I expected a temporary improvement in her behavior. Perhaps a grudging, insincere apology at Reed's insistence. What I didn't anticipate was Reed's deliberate approach toward me, with Lyra following behind looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Ms. Richardson, Reed addressed me with formal precision. Would you join us for a moment? Curious eyes turned our way as I nodded and followed them to a slightly more private area near the windows. Whatever reprimand Reed had delivered seemed to have significantly impacted Lyra, whose earlier bravado had vanished. Lieutenant Richardson has something she would like to say, Reed prompted. Lyra cleared her throat, looking genuinely uncomfortable. I apologize for my unprofessional comments, Ella. They were inappropriate and disrespectful. The scripted quality of her apology suggested Reed's direct intervention rather than genuine remorse, but I accepted with a simple nod. Thank you, Lyra. What happened next altered the family dynamics forever. Reed straightened to full military posture, his gaze focused with an intensity that would have alerted any trained operative. "Ms. Richardson, forgive the unusual circumstances, but I've just realized who you are." Lyra looked confused. "Colonel, it's just my sister." "Lieutenant, stand at attention," Reed commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lyra complied automatically, her military training overriding her confusion. Reed turned back to me, and to my absolute shock, came to full attention and rendered a crisp, formal salute. "It's an honor to meet you properly, ma'am," he said, holding the salute. The reception room fell silent as nearby guests noticed the extraordinary scene, a full colonel saluting a seemingly ordinary civilian woman. My years of training nearly failed me as I fought to maintain my cover in the face of this unexpected breach of protocol. "Colonel Reed," I said quietly, "this isn't necessary or appropriate." "With respect, ma'am, it absolutely is," he replied without lowering his salute. Protocol and training took over. I returned a subtle nod, the civilian acknowledgement of a military salute, allowing him to lower his hand. By now, the entire reception was watching in stunned silence. Lyra stood frozen at attention, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. "Lieutenant Richardson," Reed addressed her formally, "I apologize for not making this clear earlier. Your sister's position and contributions are significantly beyond what you've been led to believe. While specifics remain classified, you should understand that she operates at a level that commands my professional respect." Dad approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "Colonel Reed, what exactly is happening here?" Reed turned to face him, maintaining formal military bearing. "Colonel Richardson, sir, I'm afraid I can't provide details due to classification levels. However, I can confirm that your daughter Ella has provided exceptional service to her country in ways I am personally familiar with and deeply respectful of." The room remained eerily silent as my carefully constructed worlds collided. Decades of family dynamics shifted in real time as guests processed the implications of a high-ranking military officer showing such deference to the supposedly underachieving Richardson daughter. "Is this true?" Dad asked me directly, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I maintain my cover as training demanded. My work involves analysis for government agencies, as I've always said." "Analysis that has directly saved American lives," Reed added carefully, threading the needle between security protocols and necessary revelation. "Including military personnel." Lyra's face had gone pale, her military discipline barely containing her shock. "But you're just an analyst, aren't you?" "Your sister is a lot of things, Lieutenant," Reed replied before I could. "None of which I can elaborate on, and all of which deserve your respect." The other military personnel in the room seemed to grasp the implications faster than the civilians. Several straightened their posture subtly, their professional assessment of me visibly shifting. One officer near the bar, whose ribbon rack indicated intelligence background, showed a flash of recognition before carefully schooling his features. "I think," I said calmly into the awkward silence, "that we should remember we're at Ethan and Emily's wedding. This is their day, not mine." This reminder of social propriety broke the immediate tension. Conversations gradually resumed, though with frequent glances in my direction. The wedding coordinator, sensing the unusual atmosphere, prompted the DJ to announce the cake cutting, creating a welcome distraction. As guests migrated toward the cake display, Lyra remained rooted in place, her military bearing giving way to genuine vulnerability I hadn't seen since childhood. "Ella, I don't understand," she said quietly. "All this time." "Not here," I cut her off gently. "Later." Dad stood nearby, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something I'd rarely seen directed at me, respect tinged with uncertainty. Mom joined us, her eyes suggesting she'd suspected more about my work than she'd ever acknowledged. "Always knew you were doing something important," she said softly, squeezing my hand. "A mother knows." The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of careful conversations and avoided questions. I maintained my cover story while acknowledging that yes, my work occasionally involved more responsibility than I'd indicated. Colonel Reed strategically positioned himself nearby, deflecting the more direct inquiries with practiced skill. Classification protocols, he would explain with appropriate military gravity when relatives pushed too hard for details. National security considerations prevent further discussion. By the time the newlyweds departed in a shower of rose petals, a new family narrative had emerged, one where Ella Richardson's mysterious government job carried implications that commanded respect from military leadership. The specifics remained appropriately vague, but the impact was undeniable. As guests began departing, Lyra approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. Dad suggested breakfast tomorrow at the hotel. Just family. Would that be acceptable? The formal phrasing revealed her profound disorientation. The sister who had confidently dismissed me hours earlier now addressed me with the uncertainty usually reserved for superior officers. 9 o'clock would work, I replied evenly. As I gathered my belongings to leave, Colonel Reed approached one final time, maintaining a professional distance. Ms. Richardson, I apologize if my actions caused you any professional complications. The damage is contained, I assured him, keeping my voice low. Though I'd appreciate no further elaboration on what you may or may not know about my work. Understood completely. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, the Singapore operation was textbook. They still teach it as a case study. I allowed myself the smallest smile. Good to know, Colonel. Have a pleasant evening. As I drove back to my hotel, I considered the seismic shift in my family relationships. Years of careful compartmentalization had crumbled in an instant. The path ahead would require a delicate balance between maintaining necessary secrecy and navigating my family's newfound awareness. For better or worse, they had finally glimpsed the truth I'd kept hidden for years. That Ella Richardson had found her own way to serve, invisible but essential, in the shadows where some of the most important work happens. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty at 9 the next morning. I arrived first, selecting a corner table with good sightlines to all entrances, a professional habit I no longer needed to disguise from my family. I ordered coffee and waited, mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. Mom and Dad arrived together at 9:03, both looking like they'd had little sleep. Dad wore the stiff expression I recognized from childhood family meetings about serious matters. Mom's eyes held a mixture of curiosity and concern. Good morning, I greeted them with deliberate normalcy. They took seats across from me, the silence stretching uncomfortably until Lyra arrived at 9:07, still adjusting her civilian clothes with military precision. She'd clearly made an effort with her appearance, perhaps to compensate for her behavior the previous evening. Sorry I'm late, she said, though she wasn't. The apology itself was unusual coming from her. The server took our breakfast orders and departed, leaving us in a silence heavy with unasked questions. I suppose we should discuss what happened last night, Dad finally said, his tone carefully neutral. To be clear, I began, setting parameters as I would in any sensitive operation. There are aspects of my work I legally cannot discuss, even with family. That hasn't changed. Dad nodded stiffly. Colonel Reed made that abundantly clear. But it seems there's been some miscommunication about the nature of your government service. The diplomatic phrasing almost made me smile. Decades of dismissing my career as insignificant paper pushing reduced to miscommunication. My official job description is accurate, I replied. I analyze data for government agencies. The specific nature and importance of that analysis falls under classification protocols. But a full colonel saluted you, Lyra interjected, her voice betraying lingering disbelief. That doesn't happen for regular analysts. No, I acknowledged, it doesn't. Mom reached across the table to take my hand. Honey, we never meant to dismiss your work. We just didn't understand. You never asked, I pointed out gently. You assumed. Dad's expression tightened with the uncomfortable recognition of truth. Your grandfather, he said after a moment, he knew, didn't he? The question surprised me. What makes you say that? Things he said over the years. His confidence in your career choice when the rest of us questioned it. Dad's gaze sharpened. Arthur wasn't just Army, was he? I considered my response carefully. Grandpa served his country in multiple capacities, some more documented than others. Understanding dawned in Dad's eyes. And you followed that path rather than the uniform. I found my way to serve, I said simply, echoing Grandpa Arthur's words. The server returned with our food, providing a welcome interruption. When he departed, Lyra leaned forward, her expression troubled. All those times I mocked your job, she said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. The things I said last night. You didn't know, I offered. I didn't try to know, she corrected herself. I assumed that because you weren't in uniform, you weren't really serving. That was arrogant and unfair. The admission clearly cost her pride, and I recognized the courage it took. Thank you for saying that. Can you tell us anything about what you actually do? She asked. I smiled slightly. I analyze data for government agencies with international security interests. My language skills are useful in this capacity. That's really all you can say? Lyra pressed. That's really all I can say, I confirmed. Dad studied me with new eyes. The physical changes Colonel Reed mentioned. You're not just sitting at a desk, are you? Physical fitness is important in many government roles, I replied diplomatically. A hint of paternal concern crossed his face. Are you in danger, Ella? The question touched me unexpectedly. All service carries risk, Dad. Different kinds for different roles. He nodded slowly, military understanding bridging the gap where civilian explanation couldn't. And you're good at what you do. Reed made that clear. I do my best, I said simply. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even him. For not seeing, for assuming. You saw what I was required to show, I assured him. That was the point. Mom squeezed my hand again. I always knew you were doing something important. A mother senses these things. The conversation gradually shifted to safer topics. Cousin Ethan's honeymoon plans, Mom's garden club, Dad's veterans organization activities. But something fundamental had changed. The familiar family hierarchy had been permanently disrupted, creating space for a new equilibrium. As we finished breakfast, Lyra caught me alone while our parents settled the bill. I don't suppose you could tell me what Operation Reed was referring to, she asked hopefully. Not a chance, I smiled. Worth a try. She hesitated. I've spent years feeling sorry for you, thinking you'd settled for less. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Different paths, same commitment, I offered, extending an olive branch. Like Grandpa used to say. Lyra nodded, then added with a hint of her old competitiveness, though I still bet I could outrun you. Maybe someday we'll find out, I replied, letting her see just enough of my physical confidence to leave her wondering. 6 months later, the family gathered for Thanksgiving at my parents' home in Connecticut. The dynamics had evolved into something healthier, if still occasionally awkward. Dad had stopped introducing me as his daughter who works for the government with that tone of disappointment. Instead, he simply said I worked in international security analysis with a hint of pride he tried to conceal. Lyra and I had established a new relationship based on mutual respect for our different forms of service. She'd stopped trying to extract classified information after the third attempt, accepting that some boundaries would remain. 1 week after Thanksgiving, I stood in a secure government facility, receiving a Distinguished Service Medal for an operation that would never be publicly acknowledged. The private ceremony included only those with appropriate clearance levels, and, surprisingly, my family. Jessica had helped arrange the special one-time clearances, arguing successfully that family support enhanced operational resilience. They sat in the back row, unable to hear the classified details of the commendation, but present for the recognition itself. As the medal was pinned to my jacket, I glanced toward the small audience. Mom dabbed tears with a tissue. Dad sat ramrod straight, military bearing on full display, his expression one of unmistakable pride. And Lyra, my perpetually competitive sister, rendered a perfect military salute as our eyes met. In that moment, the compartmentalized pieces of my life aligned briefly into a coherent whole. The path I'd chosen remained largely invisible, my contributions mostly unrecognized beyond select circles. But now, the people who mattered most had glimpsed enough of the truth to understand. Different battlefields, different sacrifices, same commitment to service. As we left the secure facility, Dad placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture he'd always used with Lyra to convey pride without words. No elaborate speeches or explanations were necessary. We had found our way to mutual understanding. Some paths to service stand in the spotlight, uniformed and visible for all to honor. Others operate in the shadows, unseen but essential. Both protect what matters most. Both deserve respect. Have you ever had a moment when someone finally saw your true worth after years of being underestimated? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding validation in unexpected ways. Remember, sometimes the quietest service speaks the loudest when the right moment comes. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that your contributions matter, even when they go unrecognized.